Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's very special episode of A Little Bit Culty.
This one's from the vaults, Sarah.
The Patreon vaults.
Patreon Unplugged.
We shared it there first, and it was well loved. And we thought we'd share it here on the main feed as well. And I think that this is the first cult that we've ever covered that was started and run by a landscaper.
That's only because Keith didn't put landscaper on his resume, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, landscaper champ of 1982.
I've been landscaping since I was 6 years old.
Landscaping's my middle name.
Right. Today we're talking about the Zion Society, and we're going to talk to one of the people responsible for taking it down. This was a polygamist sect that had about 100 members at its peak, I believe. Their leader was Arvin Shreeve. He was a landscaper, as we've mentioned, in Ogden, Utah, where my dad was born, and he spent many years working for that city before starting the cult. This is also interesting. They occupied about 10 houses on a cul-de-sac in Ogden.
It's very possible that maybe Arvin mowed your dad's family's lawn. I don't know.
Or, my dad he left there at 2 or 3. So
they could have passed each other in the streets. Anyway, I digress. I'm guessing these houses were well kept.
Yes, one of his ex-followers described as something from the Stepford Wives.
So they managed to just stay hidden in plain sight?
You got it, Sarah. That's right, and Arvin Shreeve was not attention-grabbing. He was a mousy guy with big glasses and receding hairline and a gut who was well into his 50s when he had led the cult. But he seemed to know something about recruitment. It's funny how these guys work. The women who joined the Zion Society were often divorced and had been excommunicated from the mainstream Mormon church.
So basically people who had a hard time being accepted in small-town Utah in the 80s.
Yes, and Shreeve gathered 28 wives and dozens of followers, male and female, who accepted him as a prophet, who knew, and received daily communication from God. There's that lifeline to God again.
Hello, God.
The
It's
Mormons have that one down.
So all of this is definitely reminding me of Warren Jeffs, the fugitive fundamentalist Mormon leader who was put on trial back in 2007.
They were both polygamous cult leaders, but Shreve's wives did not look like the ones from Jeff's group, the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Those women who looked like they were on the Oregon Trail.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were decked in high heels and lipstick, and their weight and physical appearance were strictly monitored and controlled by their, quote, sister councils.
Sister councils. I'm guessing this is the part where the line between victim and collaborator gets a little blurry.
So all the men of the Zion Society had several wives, and they formed a, quote, sister council. Many of those women were arrested and convicted in the same bust for child sexual abuse that put Shreeve in jail for the rest of his life.
Well, our special guest can tell us more. Mike King is the creator and host of Profiling Evil, a YouTube channel and podcast that covers breaking true crime stories. Before that, he worked in law enforcement for 4 decades. In 1991, he was a lieutenant in the Ogden Police Department and became one of the lead investigators that took down the Zion Society. Mike has written a fascinating book about that case called Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult.
As Mike will tell us, it all started with one woman who couldn't stand the guilt anymore and came to the local district attorney with an incredible story.
That's right, and this all led to a case that was disturbing and bizarre, even by the standard of all the other polygamy cults. We had the pleasure of speaking with Mike King in person, in front of a live audience at CrimeCon, so you will hear some audience reactions and applause and whatnot. I do think it's important to note that there is a major trigger warning for this episode. Lots of disturbing conversation around the abuse of children and the sexual abuse of children. Please listen with care or skip if you need to. Take care of yourselves, dear listeners, and please enjoy our conversation with Mike King. How's everyone doing? This is our second live podcast ever. So
that's right.
Bear with us.
We have notes.
We do have notes and glasses to show that we are very old now and need reading glasses. Oh, there's two of these
I just
already.
turned 50 last week.
Yes. Woo! I mean, look at this.
Just a boy.
Who here was at our talk yesterday, just so I know? Okay, a lot of you. And who here saw Mike yesterday? Okay, so there's going to be maybe some repeats, a little crossover. But if you weren't here yesterday, I'll just say that when Nippy turned 50, we were in Manhattan. We were also in Manhattan 7 years before. We'd gone to celebrate his birthday, and then the next day is when he dropped me off at the FBI to tell them that I'd been branded and I was in a cult, and they were like, okay.
They're like, cool story.
Yeah, but you asked for it? I don't really get it. Anyway, so it's been 7 years, and here we are at CrimeCon with a personal hero, a new hero of mine, ours, Mike King. And the reason we're here today is, well, we were invited because of our cult shit show, and they said, well, you can speak, which we did, and then they said, would you like to do a live podcast? And we said, well, we always interview a guest. Is there anyone who's coming who's also in the cult space? Because, crime, cults, there's a bit of a Venn diagram there sometimes. And we were actually not familiar yet with Mike's work, nor...
Which is unbelievable.
Unbelievable, nor the cult that he exposed. So since we've been connected, we've obviously deep dived. We read his book, which we highly recommend.
Quick read.
Quick read, captivating. It reads like a thriller. Has this been made into a movie yet?
No, you'll take care of that, I assume.
Yes,
Okay.
we will take care of that.
We will. It really should be made into a movie. It just reads like a captivating thriller with all the hope and redemption that you want in these types of cases, which is so rare. So if you didn't hear, for those of the people in the audience that weren't at your talk yesterday, can you give us just a little background to who you are and why you're here and how you ended up on the stage? Your life story, essentially.
Oh, well, number one, I was like this giddy fan when I knew that I was going to meet Sarah and Nippy, and it was just a thrill to be able to come and spend time, and we've created this incredible bond in such a short time. We've had phone conversations and other things. The cult that I was involved in, listen, I never intended on looking into cults or sexual abuse or anything else, and I mentioned yesterday, I was having the time of my life just buying stolen cars with a team of 8 cops, and we were just tearing it up and working our way up a criminal enterprise. When I had an opportunity as I walked into the county attorney's office, kind of like I did on many days, and just kind of lumping along and waving, and I said, hey, how's everybody doing? And they said, oh, would you mind talking to this woman? She's been waiting for some time to talk to someone. It was a beautiful woman, 20 years old, sitting in a chair, and I walked over, and she confidently stood up, and she shook my hand, and it was one of those good, strong grips, and she said, hey, I've been involved in a cult that's sexually abusing children. Do you have a minute to talk to me? Well, of course, it turned into one of the most incredible, game-changing parts of my law enforcement career, because I turned into a cult expert. That led me into looking at polygamist groups and other types of cults all across the country, and it changed my life because I was more intrigued not by the fact that criminals commit crime, and that's what predators do, But this particular kind of criminal, when they form a cult, have this way of getting everyone to believe they are the top drawer in the shelf and the most important person on earth, and they will sacrifice everything, including their most prized possession, their children, in order to do what they think that God is that they believe in. And so that's my experience leading into all of this.
Right.
So it's a good question. Our format is traditionally, how'd you get in, how'd you get out, what red flags did you miss, and the healing. And we thought maybe Aaron's story would be a good segue into explaining to our audience how Aaron was susceptible and drawing the parallels maybe between our stories and maybe other people and how they may have been susceptible in a certain way. Can you walk us through how the Zion cult preyed on Aaron as an example, and thereby all others, I think, a little bit as well. But how is her example to you, and what would you learn in the process of how these guys work?
So there were two parallel universes coming together to collide at one moment. There was this predatory, self-proclaimed prophet who had decided he needed more wives and he needed to grow this enterprise that he was building.
Sounds
and,
familiar.
I was going to say, the Keith Raniere of Ogden, Utah.
There we go.
And the parallels in the book between how you described it were really, you really demonstrated you understood how they work. So
Yeah, and isn't it crazy? They receive revelation that fits what their need is for that particular moment. And we've seen it in so many cult cases, even including those where we just recently got a death penalty. But as he was putting together his cult, he determined and started to figure out the kind of people that were most susceptible to what he needed. And they don't want crazy, dumb people in cults, do they?
No.
They want intelligent people that are going to contribute, and they want people that are going to be able to help financially. Sometimes that's, hey, you've gone through a divorce and you got half the settlement. Now donate it all to me, your leader, and I'm going to make your life better. I'm going to give you a house to live in and food to eat. And all I'm going to require is that, you become one of my sex slaves, and we continue this thing together. But I'm also going to require that you recruit. It's almost like these pyramid schemes that you watch.
And he doesn't lay that out at the beginning, like, hi, I'm Arvin, will you become my sex slave / spiritual wife? He says, first, come, oh, you're recently divorced, you're out of a bad marriage, we have a community, we'll help you, we'll take care of you and your child. So there's a bait and switch that we see time and time again. So the initial hook isn't sex slave, it's community, right?
Absolutely, and one of my mentors through paper, I never knew her personally, although I've come to know many of the experts, was Dr. Margaret Singer, who said, cults know that if you knew from the get-go what you were in for and why, you'd never join.
Right, and I say this a lot. If they said, would you like Keith Raniere's initials on your crotch on day one of my 5-day, would I have said yes? Absolutely not. Same example.
And they have really, I think, warm people as facilitating the con as well. And I often find sometimes that the people facilitating the con aren't necessarily in on it to the degree that someone like Arvin or Keith Raniere has leveraged the other person's trust. So I see that you're a warm person, Sarah's a warm person. I know that they can be advocates for my message while I can leverage Sarah's trust or your trust to get close to that person unbeknownst to Sarah. So Sarah would be enrolling someone into the bad thing without Sarah not necessarily being aware of it.
Like with Erin, right? She didn't know really what she was getting into, right? She joined this community. So tell the audience a little bit about what that was like at the beginning and then what it turned into.
So if we were to then look at this parallel universe of Erin's, she was a mom who was married, and she was in a destructive, mean marital situation. She claims that her husband was physically abusive, emotionally abusive. She had children, and she was now pregnant with another child, and she was facing that critical decision of, do I continue to put up with this malarkey, or do I try to do something different? And she really did a brave thing, because she went out and she decided to go to work for her Aunt Judy in a salon doing tanning and fixing hair, and tried to make it on her own. But at an hourly rate, she wasn't surviving very well. She was living at the very poverty line level. She was trying to take advantage of what public services might be there. But the group then found her in this very vulnerable position and started to befriend her because she was actually the perfect profile of a target that they wanted. And as they developed that relationship, they started inviting her to the cult. They started love bombing her, telling her, we understand you. We've been through this. We have a special insight into your life because we've lived it. And you can come and join with us where you're going to be happy. You're going to have a place that's safe. And she finally bit, and she bit hook, line, and sinker.
Yes.
And as she moved in, they said, hey, we're going to help you transition a little bit. And then they started to ingest her with some drugs. And we don't have proof of this. We only have what she believes she went through, which was this incredible funk for about 30 days. But during that time, they took her daughter and stripped her away and said, we'll just take care of this little 6-year-old child. And then that child began an indoctrination process. And they slowly started to separate her from her support system, from her memories of who she was. And then they also said, and by the way, we're the only ones that understand you.
Of course.
Did you experience the same things?
Absolutely. Well, just to recap for our audience who listens to a little bit culty, we have the classic love bombing, the classic isolation, classic creating this dependency. And I don't think we were drugged, as far as we know.
I wasn't.
But there were people we believe that were the ones that had sexual relations with Keith Raniere, purported seeing certain things and hallucinating. So I think that his part of giving them that experience, there was drugs, but we don't know for sure, and that has not been proven. I did tell Payne Lindsay that we have some unresolved things in the NXIVM case that we need to discuss, so stay tuned for that. I didn't tell you that.
I
But
think
people
we're going to
died,
find out
too.
more, yeah.
People died. We
yeah.
think they were poisoned. That's a separate, stay tuned. But back to your story. For those who don't know, paint a picture a little bit of the compound. It was a compound within normal society in the suburbs. Normal houses that they took over, 10 houses, I believe, in a sort of very isolated suburb with other houses that weren't part of the cult.
Had a bunker.
You had the bunker.
Big red flag.
Oh, that dang bunker. Yeah, it actually was 14 homes, but we got search warrants for 10 of the 14 homes. But that was what was so intriguing. When you think about groups like the FLDS or Waco or others, where they go out into the outskirts of a community where they can stay a little more under the covers, they can be a little less transparent. That's usually where you see a cult start to grow and build and do their thing. This group was entirely different, and it was actually a really remarkable strategy because they built it right under our noses. They started taking over a small little cul-de-sac community, and it was a brand new housing development, and they strategically purchased homes so they had sentries as you came into the neighborhood. As they built the homes, they were wiring them together so that they had surveillance systems knowing what each of them were doing from location to location. And they tried to appear seemingly normal. In fact, this was a group that was practicing polygamy, but they recognized we can't go around in prairie dresses and goofy haircuts, and I hope I haven't offended anybody by saying that. But
I think it's fair to say.
But what they did do is they said our signature, and we talk about the difference between modus operandi in criminal cases and signatures in these serial cases. You see the same thing in cults. You see signatures like tattoos.
Right.
Or in this particular case, the signature became the well-manicured lawns that were so pristine that people throughout the community would drive through, but they were using it as a brochure to further the boss's landscaping business.
It was part of the sell.
It was incredible. I remember with my wife driving through those neighborhoods, but then the ghost stories started trickling out.
So before Aaron came into your office and said, hey, I was in a cult that's abusing children, you hadn't heard of this group?
We had heard about it because we had husbands, usually estranged fathers, who would come into the county attorney's office and they would say, hey, I've got this problem. My wife and I just went through a divorce. She won't let me see the kids. Right. She's now telling me that I can buy the boys as part of a custody settlement, but I can't get my daughters. And we had fathers paying $10,000 a piece on our average to buy their male children back through custody, but it was all handled through the civil litigation process in family court. And they'd say, what are you going to do about this? And law enforcement would look at them and say, we can't do anything. We don't deal with custody issues.
Right.
Because we had no idea what was happening deeper in this organization, because these things are so tight-knit and closed. I call them closed societies.
Yeah. Yes. This podcast certainly would not be happening without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, ad-free and exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with fan favorites from our past episodes, Q&As, and all sorts of goodies. It's fun over there, people.
Kia ora, I'm Anke Richter, who wrote the bestseller Cult Trip, and I'm bringing you an exciting event. Get ready for Dcult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm, or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left cultic groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website, dcult.net, for all the info.
Well, everybody, autumn has arrived. Taking my closet from summer to fall has always been a struggle, but honestly, sometimes I just hate all my clothes. Anyone else feel that? But with the help of Quince, one of our favorite sponsors, I can keep my wardrobe fresh without completely blowing my budget. Quince offers timeless, high-quality items for so much less, like cashmere sweatpants for $50 and washable silk tops, and so many pants and dresses for nearly every occasion. The best part? Quince offers items priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. It's like quiet luxury for less. That's because Quince partners with top factories to cut out the middleman and pass those savings on to you, dear listener. And you can shop knowing that Quince only partners with factories that use safe and ethical manufacturing practices. It's a win-win. It's still pretty hot here in Atlanta, but I'm just counting down the days till it's cool enough to wear the Mongolian cashmere fisherman crewneck sweater made from Mongolian cashmere. It has this relaxed fit and stylish ribbing that's just the perfect style for fall. It feels buttery soft and high-end and half the traditional price of retail. So if you're ready to start styling for fall, make switching seasons a breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials. Go to quince.com/culty for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/culty to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culty. Happy shopping! You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we? Well, I was a bit shocked. Like in your book, I was shocked that law enforcement, I guess because this was the 80s and 90s. It's not the time we're in now where I feel like people are a little more armed with how to deal with such things. But I was shocked that the police or the authorities at that time didn't get involved with those civil cases where the cult was involved. What do you think they were missing? Like they just weren't trained in those red flags?
No, I don't think it was an issue of training. I think it was a couple of things in particular. One is that if any member of the cult were to leave to go out to do something, and all the women were required to go out and work in the community, which is a little different than you see in some cults. But they were required, and they were working as housekeepers in hotels and other kinds of things. And they could only go out, and they would only work shifts in tandem. So they always had to have several members of the cult whenever they went out together. Everyone donated all their property, vehicles, everything else to the leadership of the cult, who would determine who could drive a car, but they would have to say, I'm going with this person. And it was always a trusted advisor that accompanied anyone into the community. There were no telephones in any of the homes, only in this self-proclaimed prophet's home. Okay. So anyone who wanted to make a phone call had to go through the leadership to get, so there's this massive amount of control. So law enforcement had no idea. Now, there were multiple accounts where law enforcement responded to the scene to talk to and try to do welfare checks on children because of husbands who said, I haven't talked to my daughter in 4 years, you know? Wow. And law enforcement would go in, that child would show up, they were programmed, and that's probably the shortcoming is law enforcement didn't understand the programmed canned responses that come in a cult that you see where someone is actually taught, this is how you're going to respond when law enforcement asks you a question.
And what were they trained to say?
So, number one, I'm very happy here.
Right.
Everyone was very happy, and everyone in the group had this very similar Stepford wife response when you looked at it. And I don't know any better description. The children were the perfect child on a 1940s television program that quietly stood in the corner, well-dressed, well-behaved, and smiled and did nothing else. So it was very controlled. And that's a part where maybe we missed it, but you're taking maybe a 21-year-old testosterone-filled patrol officer and saying, go try to figure out if there's something goofy going on in that family.
Right.
And I imagine that speaks to the leader, Arvin's intelligence in terms of how he's able to anticipate what law enforcement may or may not do. How much do you think he was informed, and how much do you think he anticipated what you guys were going to come in and do? Because it seems like he was pretty well prepared, even for a doomsday.
You know, there's the part in the book where we talk about the fact that when we took the 32 children into protective custody, we started interviewing them with the anatomically correct dolls, which was just standard procedure back then to talk about, just tell me point where you were touched or things like that. The children just repelled those, and actually it was as repulsive to them and frightening as anything you could imagine. It would be like I walked in with Lucifer himself and said, Sarah, why don't you just have a conversation with this guy?
For me, it would be a tarantula, but yes, yeah.
It would, okay, and that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
The kids were trained with anatomically correct dolls that were called the devil's dolls by the cult leaders. The cult leaders dressed up like police officers. They would put false uniforms on. They would come in with suits and ties, and they would interview the children, and they'd say, if you're asked a question, how would you respond? And the child would say, I'd say this, and they'd say, no, this is how you're to respond. What we missed, because it was so infrequent, was that the programming was consistent. But the first patrol officer who responded to do a welfare check wasn't the same officer that responded 3 months later. And that person came in fresh and saw this experience and walked away and said, man, very polite kids.
Right. The term that we use in a little bit culty is toxic positivity. So,
I like that.
Yeah, so Stepford wives, toxic positivity, same. Yes.
And isn't it sickening? I listened to Chad Daybell. I listened to Warren Jeffs. Yeah. I listened to Arvin Shreeve. I even listened to Keith Rainier, and I hear this same kind of passive approach to, I'm going to just lull you into my web.
There is definitely a tone used, a faux humble, very calming, friendly. What other similarities did you see between?
That's the coercion.
That is the beginning of the coercion.
Yeah.
That we're just.
So with the love bombing, if you reacted inappropriately, you said, wait a minute, why are we doing that? There's this immediate emotional excommunication within the group of, you know what, maybe you need to go into timeout, do a little praying, and think about things. And it could last for days or weeks or even months, where the group would treat them so coldly and distantly, yet keep them hanging on just enough to keep them embedded in the group.
It's cancel culture. It's cancel culture inside the more.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. And so we saw that kind of repetitive behavior. And then we saw people that were told if they weren't performing in a way that the prophet demanded, it might be sexually, it might be emotionally, physically, that they would be sent to this little secret cubbyhole under the stairs, and they would lock these little children in the cubbyhole, and they'd say, go in and pray, and eventually your guardian angel will come to you and give you a little instruction, kind of tune you up, and then come out and tell us what you learned from this spiritual person that appeared to you, and how that's going to change your behavior, and we'll reintroduce things like food and love and regular kinds of experiences. And so people quickly came into line. And many women in that cult told me, if all I had to do was have sex with Arvin every once in a while and comply in order to have a safe place for my kids or a place for me to safely sleep at night, I was willing to do it. For some reason, they believed that meant safety.
Wow. And we haven't even really talked about it.
Arvin, yeah.
And I also just forgive us if when this goes live on our channel, we will have a trigger warning, and I should say it again here. What Arvin did to these women and children is horrific, and just, listen carefully and take care of yourselves, because reading it was upsetting, and this is live, and I have to be aware that these are real people that you've spent many decades with and watched them go from victim to survivor, and they have been through horrendous things.
They have been. And for anyone who hasn't read the book, it's written very tastefully. We acknowledge that sexual assault happened, but we don't dive into it. We don't explore it. We don't tantalize it. It's just accepting the fact that it happened. The problem is it happened thousands of times.
It did. Going back for a second, and we've had some tangents, but I want to make sure that we're clear in terms of Aaron's journey and the other victims' journeys. What do you think were some of the red flags that people missed because they were love bombed and isolated and they didn't have, this amazing cult education we have now? What are some of the things that happened to them along the journey that should have or could have been red flags?
Well, I think the first thing is cults are really good at finding people with a like-minded mentality. Somebody who wants to, in your case, improve themselves, become a better human being and do more than anyone else, really excel. They're really good at figuring out who that is. A cult is really good at figuring out, for instance, Chad Dabo, really good at figuring out who have doomsday mentalities and this idea that I deserve more light and knowledge from God than the guy sitting next to me. And so it's this elitism that comes in, and people say, how can you say elitism in the way that cults are treated? But there is an elitism in all of these cults of how lucky they are. And you think about it, throughout history, one of the best ways to bring a team together is to make them feel like they're in something alone.
Us versus them.
Isn't that a great strategy?
Yeah, it really is.
So they used that. They then used coercive control inside of the cult as they came in, that they craftily would suggest through emotion, you're on track or you're off track. And the people knew it, and the people that were delivering those messages certainly understood what they were delivering. They knew, and even those who become leaders, and we've seen this even recently with Twin Flames, for instance, where they become a predator themselves. They would have never been a predator for any reason in their life, but as they accept the doctrine or the philosophy, they then start to defend the doctrine and the philosophy. Then they start to convince others. But when the awakening starts to happen, they hit this critical moment where they either have to admit, I was duped, or I'm going to hang in there and keep doing this.
Right. We know that one. How did Erin finally wake up? What was her final straw that caused her to walk into your office and tell all?
Can you imagine this? They had a game called Rape in the Dark. And the children would be brought into a big circle, and you'll have to read the book to get this. I hope you got the catch on that.
Yes.
But they would go through a series of questions and hand squeezes and all kinds of goofy things like you did in scout camp or girls camp or with your best friends after playing with the Ouija board on a Friday night. But they would go through this series of questions which would eventually identify one of the children or one of the adult women. And by the way, this is one of the intriguing parts about the Zion Society is while there were a group of men, primarily the self-proclaimed prophet, that were sexually abusing everyone, the prophet came up with his own form of spiritual sexuality that he called the sexual way of life. And the sexual way of life doctrine was that I, Arvin, can have sex with all of you, including 2-year-old children, or you can have sex with each other, women. Only the women could have sex with each other. So his own form of lesbianism, but it was sanctioned. And so women who would never have been in a position that would have been attractive to them would do it because they believed God wanted them to participate in this. So as they played rape in the dark, eventually one of those people, child or adult, would luckily be called the rapist.
Oh my God.
And then they would be able to assault anyone else within that circle any way that they wanted. And it was one of their favorite games.
Wow. What was Arvin's purpose of having women be with each other?
So I believe initially Arvin came to realize that with 28 wives, the old stallion couldn't do what he thought he could do. And I think that there was a period of time that we uncovered where actually they created a lingerie business and they were selling lingerie to the local strippers in town. And then they would, in exchange, have the strippers come in and teach the children how to dance erotically. And they started having some conflicts. In fact, I have audio still of a couple of strippers, one in particular named Marnie, who I will never forget because she was just so blunt, comical, and matter of fact, who said, yeah, that old man wanted me to fool around with him. But she said, I kind of preferred the girls that were coming to buy the lingerie. So they started having affairs outside of the cult with the stripper, who was also then later helping them line up to prostitute the little girls to people and men in the community. So as they did that, it became very evident to us that Arvin came up with revelation, which is so common in these cults, in my opinion. When there's a problem I can't solve, all I need to do is say, God has revealed to me that this is what's supposed to happen.
Big red flag. I talked to God. He said, I need to marry you all even though you're under 12.
Exactly.
It's so, every single one of these groups, they have a direct line to God.
Yeah, they outsource their authority to God.
Isn't that awesome? And, you know, when you look at it in the beginning stages
Not
of
awesome, but wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
I spent my life in criminal behavior.
Let's just be clear.
He's not celebrating.
Yeah, okay, great.
But the idea is really quite clear when you start to examine the criminal behavior or the motivation for what they do. And so you think about it, this is a guy who was raised in a traditional mainstream Latter-day Saint family. But he had this predatory, pedophilic perversion. And so what he does is he creates a religion that says, hey, it's okay for me to have multiple companions, which also included going to Salt Lake City and buying prostitutes on Thursday nights. And he said, listen, I didn't want to have sex with those prostitutes, but God commanded me to do it to gain more experience.
Right.
So as this happens, prophecy is revealed that allows them to justify what they know morally is wrong. And then if God tells you something is to be done a certain way, it helps you bridge what is criminally wrong too, because I've heard this from so many stinking self-proclaimed prophets. I would rather offend man than offend God.
How convenient. Was this guy friends with Warren Jeffs? Were they comparing notes? Or?
You know, actually, it's really interesting because he is a spin-off ancestral line. Many people want to shout out and say, oh, all the Latter-day Saints are polygamists, you know. And I like to remind folks that in my research, the Latter-day Saint faith in 1890 said, polygamy's out. Now, they may not have wanted to do that, but they recognized it was illegal and that it was really causing lots of problems. They were trying to become a state in Utah. They cut the thread. But a group of men, they called them the Council of Seven, went down to southern Utah and formed the first polygamous movement. and said, mainstream church of LDS is wrong. God really does want us to continue doing this. Mm-hmm. And that began the polygamist movement that you see in much of the United States as people have filtered out. So you could actually change or trace Arvin's line through people who were into the Council of Seven. So that's where, personally, I believe that mentality and process came through. Also, again, if you're a predator and a pedophile and you want to have relationships inside of your marriage with a lot of different women, you got to come up with some kind of spiritual reason that justifies it. So that's why I think they do this.
You have that, and you have the tool of humiliation, right?
Absolutely.
So humiliation, I think, and I think this goes on in a lot of them, humiliation is a tool to keep you loyal, because if I come clean with my behavior, not only do I have to humiliate myself in the process, I also have to admit that I was complicit with some behaviors that I otherwise would not have normalized in my normal life had the person who has outsourced to God help me normalize it. So you have to reconcile your own delusion, your own humiliation, in order to come clean and stop these things. And that takes a lot for a person to go, okay, I have to sit on my own character. I have to recognize I was humiliated. I have to go through those hurdles in order to hold this guy accountable. And there's not a lot of people who are in trauma that I think are willing to do that, especially when they were vulnerable in the first place. They let their vulnerability get leveraged in that. I think that's a hard thing. So it's going to take someone to usher them through that process. I imagine you had to do that a lot of times, and then know what you're looking at as well and at the same time.
And it's interesting, Nippy, because you think about families that try to remain a support system at home. They've been cut off anyway from relationships with members who join cults. One of the first things is what Arvin actually called search and separate. Find that person, then separate them away from their support system so that you can begin to change them and model them. But the beauty of search and separate also creates this really weird mechanism that I don't think loving families intend. But we sit and watch our wacky children join a cult, and our response is to say, what on earth's wrong with you? You've joined a cult. Right. Well, that's the one thing that's going to drive that child further toward the cult and away from the family. And so I often say, you cannot take a position. You have to remain in a position where your child actually believes, or your loved one actually believes, that if I have a question, I can still reach out to that support system.
Yes. The lifeline.
But it's not gonna happen by them counseling the child, is it?
Right. We actually did an episode with Rachel Bernstein specifically on how to help family members who have family members or friends in groups and what to say and not to say. So I'll send that to you for your team.
I would love to hear that. And I'd love to hear from the two of you, because then I think something remarkable happens that made me want to become your friend so bad. And that was, and I hope that I'm supported in this by all of these folks, is that it takes incredible courage to say, I made a goofy decision and change it. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks. So
I'll say, whenever anyone says that, I say there's a lot of people that came before us that had to go through the door and not necessarily get the result. There was 9 women who came out in 2009 that rang the bell. We didn't necessarily hear it.
We didn't listen to them.
But it was...
They paved the way.
They did pave the way, because when we heard the nefarious behavior, we had that to access, and we had a pass of people who stood up to him and weren't able to get the same results. And those were things that made it easier for us to pivot. I mean, my wife did get branded, so it wasn't really a hard decision for me. But there was also a lot of people that I could now listen to, and they were there for us when we were out, and they helped us with resources. So we're the emergent property of a lot of people who stood up to Keith and were able to take it and put it into wisdom for whatever reasons. But there was a lot of people before us that I think it's important to shout out to all them.
Yes, and also important to know that there had been a lot of bad press, and a lot of things we were holding on by very thin threads. all the negative press out there, we were told was a smear campaign, and either don't read it, or if you understand that of course it's not true, because Keith is the most noble, ethical humanitarian in the world, trying to teach ethics. Of course they're going to call him a pedophile. That's what the media does. So when I had my bad experience, all of a sudden all those things immediately were like, oh, they're true. Oh, I am in a cult. It wasn't a hard deprogramming. It was like I snapped back to reality, to my former self, very, very, very quickly.
But you two still had to make that acknowledgement.
Yes.
And you had to also face the fact that there might have been people that you have convinced to join this that might even still be there. I don't know.
There are a handful, not people directly that we brought in or enrolled, recruited, / building humanity, it was called, that there people that we directly recruited are gone, but my descendants are still there. There's maybe somewhere between 5 and 30. We don't really know. But yeah, they will have a much bigger shit sandwich to eat when they get out, because they've denied the truth and denied the results of the trial and denied so much.
For more background on what brought us here, check out my page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And if you want to see that story in streaming form, you can watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Okay, I know we've all been told that when it comes to receiving gifts, it's the thought that counts. There's that element of surprise, sure, but if I'm being honest, nothing beats getting exactly what you wanted. And with Sarah, that's extremely difficult sometimes. That's why when it comes to buying jewelry, there's no better place than BlueNile.com to get exactly what you want. Not only do I love the thousands of independently graded diamonds and fine jewelry at prices significantly below traditional retail, but their team of jewelry experts is on call to answer any questions 24/7, especially if you want to get something sports-related like that tennis bracelet. Wink, wink. So say you're hypothetically struggling to figure out which hoop earrings work best for your face shape, which I do all the time. You can call or chat with Blue Nile's team to find the perfect pair, anytime. Blue Nile also offers peace of mind with every purchase with 30-day returns and a diamond price match guarantee. They make online jewelry shopping easy, which shouldn't be a surprise. They've been doing since 1999. So what are you waiting for? Go to BlueNile.com to find the perfect piece today. That's BlueNile.com, BlueNile.com. Your significant other will thank you. I know Sarah will.
Kia ora, I'm Anke Richter, who wrote the bestseller Cult Trip, and I'm bringing you an exciting event. Get ready for Dcult 2024, the first cult awareness conference in New Zealand, happening in Christchurch this October. Are you worried about a friend or family member who's in a group that may be causing them harm? Or do you have your own story? Then join us for a weekend with experts from around the world, where those who've left culty groups can share their experiences and meet professionals who can help them. Head to our website dcult.net for all the info.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
But I want to go back to your story for a moment, because I realize we have 18 minutes.
Wow.
Can you give us, and really do need to read the book, but can you give us in a couple of minutes sort of like the cliff notes of the sting operation and the raid and bringing your team in at 4 a.m.? And I was actually amazed that you brought them in at 4 a.m. and they did the raid. Like, I would imagine that would take weeks of prep, but you're like, 4 a.m., we're going in at 6. They're like, is it a parade? And not a parade.
It was crazy.
Yeah, so how did... It was a success. I'm going to give you the summarize. It was a success. How did you do it?
So, that was the craziest thing, because this guy was so well known in the community, and especially with people with money, because he was like the coveted landscaper to have come in and do your thing.
Did Arvin actually do the landscaping?
He would actually be there physically doing it himself too. And any new family that moved into the community, you might have like the local neighbor walk over and help bang some doors and drag furniture in, but these people would come over and say, hey, this weekend we're going to come and redo your yard for nothing. And people are like, especially young couples that you'll read about in the book, were like, holy cow, something for free? I'm in. And they put in these beautiful yards.
Not for free.
There's always a price.
Yeah.
But so we had to be extremely cautious because of that. But we also had this mandate that if children were being sexually abused, we needed to move really swiftly. This couldn't be the normal, financial crimes investigation that lasts a year.
Right.
And because there was such a concern that this man had ties to the judges, to other people, to police officers, because he was doing the municipal gardens around the courts and the police department and the sheriff's office, we also had to worry about who was on the take, especially since many of our informants that we were developing were saying the cops are involved. Well, let me tell you something. Every cult I've ever dealt with has the cops involved, but I've never found one yet. I'm sure there are some, but that's a great technique to control the members, is the cops are in on this thing, and they're going to know if you tell me or you tell your story.
Oh, wow.
So then we started saying, how are we going to do this? And I went and I picked a couple of people that I really trusted as investigators and went to the police chief and said, I need these guys to help me with this thing. And then we kind of went into a secret little room and we started putting together our investigation. And we worked about 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 weeks as we prepared and tried to follow leads and get just enough that we could serve search warrants. And what we had was Corey, the insider, who drew maps of where the automatic weapons were hidden and where the food storage was and which windows had bars and which one had a lock that wasn't working when she left the cult. And so we started to build these intricate plans. And take into account, folks, there were 10 homes that we hit all at once, 14 that we had to manage. So we needed 70 police officers just to make sure that we could control this group and get in quickly and maintain control and not have some kind of an injury happen to law enforcement or to the people that we were trying to stop. And most importantly, to the 32 children that we wanted to rescue and take into custody. And so we put our plan together, and I went to my old buddies on the SWAT team, and they started working graveyard shifts, going in and drawing plans and walking their dog through the neighborhood and recording, and we started to build up our plan. And finally we had it in place, but we knew still we couldn't invite or tell anyone what we were doing. So I secretly got all of the search warrants. We got a judge who signed off on everything but that stinking bunker.
Why wouldn't you why wouldn't he give you a warrant for the bunker?
Because I didn't have any sexual assaults inside of it, and I missed a really important cue that someone might be tipped and hide in it, which is something if you're a law enforcement officer, think of all the possibilities and make sure you include them in your search warrant. But nonetheless.
You did a great job. You did a great job. You learn and grow.
The night before the raid, we sent out notifications, canceled vacation and everything else for 70 police officers, and we had a batch of really ornery cops at 4 a.m. the next morning. And I got up, couldn't sleep well. I was up early in the morning going over the bus day plans, and I was in the briefing room at about 2:30 or 3 in the morning. By about 3:30, I started hearing some lockers slamming, and I could hear a little bit of grumbling going on. And they started walking in, and I heard one of them dropping a couple of expletives and saying it's parade duty that we're doing today. And nobody could figure out what kind of parade was going on, but they knew that it had to be something stupid. And then we got all the cops in the briefing room, and when the police chief walked in, they all kind of sat a little taller. And when the district attorney walked in, they thought, and I remember one of the old salty cops that I knew very well leaning over to another cop saying, "This isn't a parade duty."
It sure wasn't.
And so we used 2 hours to brief them, get the teams out. We had about 5 to 7 officers per house based on what we were concerned about, if there were automatic weapons or other things. And this compound had been broken into a series of homes. One was a medical center. One was a center where the lingerie business was run. Another was the prophet's home. Another was the child dormitory. We had the security offices. So they were very well mapped out, including one basement that was the library for the homeschool, but it was filled with bomb-making books and sniper instruction and other kinds of things. And so when the officers hit, thankfully, and this was just a few months before Waco, so we didn't know that Waco even existed, but we were able to get in and within about 5 minutes secure all the homes, take everyone into custody, and start removing the children. Now, we also did something else that I think was quite brilliant and kind of cutting edge. We also had Child Family Services vans and workers that we brought in, and so social workers started taking custody of the children. One of which I never forgot as I walked across the street during the raid, a 14-year-old girl who was sitting in the van as they got ready to pull away that was staring at me, and I've never seen a look of contempt like I saw in that beautiful girl's face, because we had stripped them from the only thing they knew. Whether they liked being sexually assaulted or not, they loved their moms and dads.
Yeah.
Well, how you handled the children was something that really struck me. It did seem cutting edge in terms of taking care of the children and how you decided to prosecute. And tell me a little bit about that decision so that the children did not have to testify in court, which I thought was quite brilliant.
So we had been really troubled, the county attorney and I was his chief deputy on the civil side and the criminal side. And we were very concerned about the fact that children were being taken into the local police departments and sheriff's offices and interviewed in the same room that an armed robber was being interviewed, or because that's just kind of the way we did things back then. And the same cop who had just finished interviewing somebody who had committed an aggravated assault was then just sitting down and saying to a child, "So tell me what happened." Yeah. And so we had these real disconnects. And so we learned about something called the Children's Advocacy Centers, or the Children's Justice Centers, that had just popped up. There was one, I think it was in, if I remember, Alabama or something, but I'm not sure. But we built during that time the second Children's Advocacy Center, and the doors had opened a day before this raid. Wow. And that building was built to give a place where children, kind of in a home setting, oftentimes chocolate chip cookies cooking and things like that, where the children could be interviewed in more of a home setting rather than this stark, cold police department. Well, they had a baptism by fire that day because they had a batch of kids who, on the Dr. Phil show, I said I had logged 4,000 counts of rape against these children. And they made it very clear that if I doubled it, I'd be getting closer to the number of times that they were sexually assaulted during that time. So we were thrilled with the fact that we were able to get them in, but most importantly, we were able to photograph them, video them behind closed windows so they didn't know what was going on. And we were fortunate to get through, in a pretty incredible strategy, a confession out of the prophet.
Yeah.
And then I convinced him that probably the best thing would be just to tell his followers, since he was their leader, to plead guilty, and all 12 of them pled guilty. So we were able to rescue the children. We were able to keep them from testifying other than in a preliminary hearing, but it uncovered another terrible problem within the system back then, and that was that children were required to testify in a preliminary hearing about what happened. These children had been raped, some of them 500 or 600 times, and so, and by multiple adults, men and women, so they would have to testify over and again. And after 2 years, we actually stopped prosecuting because we couldn't, in all conscience, allow these children to continue to testify. And a preliminary hearing is much meaner than a regular trial, because a trial you'll have a jury, and lawyers are afraid to make a jury angry. Right. But when they only face a judge, they really rip these little children apart as they try to tear their testimony apart. We've since changed laws that prevent that. Children can be forensically examined by experts, and that becomes their testimony in court, so they don't have to go in and face that situation. So good for you, Mike.
Wow. Do you see why it needs to be a movie?
Yeah.
We have about 7 minutes. I want to ask, there's Mike in 1991 with your wisdom, and there's Mike now with your wisdom. How have you been informed, and how has law enforcement been informed, where if something like this were to pop up today, how would it be handled, how would it be expedited, and what do they have now, and what might they need and what's missing?
Well, I think, number one, I mean, I was a young testosterone-filled person. Today, I'm a seeping, whiny person. Every time I see these kids, I start crying and I hug them. So personally, I'm much different. I wish that we could somehow reverse those physiological things when we actually have something to contribute than later in life when we're just kind of telling stories. But I think what we learned are things like changing legislation so children don't have to testify, that creating forensic examinations where experts interview a child and also provide assessment to say how believable their testimony is so that we know. Because that leads defendants to face a much heavier hill or a much taller hill to climb when they decide whether they're going to plead guilty or continue to fight something. They see the evidence that's there. I think law enforcement's got better, but at the same time, we didn't have the internet at the speed that it is today, which has, I think, given the sides of evil as much of a hand as it's given good.
That's true. Is there any programs within law enforcement now that teaches coercive control and teaches what to look for, what signs or where somebody might be under undue influence?
No, I had a medical examiner who's here at the conference come up to me today and say, what's happening with legislation? I think it's a slow move, and it's really hard to say, because again, it's something I mentioned yesterday. We really want to legislate deviant behavior, but we can't. We can only put people in jail or prison or stop them with criminal behavior. And so you think about all the deviant thought that's out there that leads to this. It's usually a lot of damage done before the discovery of the criminal events. I don't know how we're going to get to a point where we can say, if you say something mean to someone or you force them to mow the lawn on Friday afternoon, that becomes coercive in nature. And I think that's going to continue to be a real battle. So what it requires is more of us in the community to acknowledge. And, I have had so many families that say, I didn't want to upset my son and lose contact with my grandchildren, but I worried that something was wrong in the family. Or I didn't like the way my brother was teaching people. Or Tammy Daybell's sister saying, I didn't want them moving in next to me because of what they were doing. We have to find a better way of kind of classifying and then packaging it in a way that law enforcement says, I got to follow up on this.
Right. I said to Sarah, if the branding thing didn't happen, right, if we didn't have a physical manifestation of the emotional abuse happen in our situation, we would have a different outcome, I think, because you can always deny it, you can always disguise it. So the apparatuses that we have right now in our culture really lock down on physical crimes, and they're totally unacceptable to us as a culture. But when it comes to those emotional crimes and those emotional abuses, even the victim will deny it's going on. So
they don't want to admit that they were duped.
Yeah, again, I agree. I think it's going to be a battle that you have to go on, but I think the conversations have to keep happening. Places like this need to keep exposing them. We need to keep shining lights, and you can't be scared of it. At the same time, you don't want to, alienate someone who's under that spell because they don't want to believe they're under that spell. So it's a very nuanced, hard thing to do, because anytime you use sort of force, you get pushback, and they dig their heels in even more. That's one of the things I've always said to Sarah is when the people that are in, we can't get them out. They hate us, right? So I don't know if there's solutions to that, but I do think these conversations are a great step in that direction.
For me, the solution always has been transparency.
Yeah.
Cults do not like transparency.
No. Criminals don't like transparency.
And criminals don't like transparency. And if we could just force transparency in many of these things, not only in our discussions with people we love that are joining cults, because they are not going to allow us to be transparent with them either, or they won't allow themselves to be transparent about what they're learning.
Okay, we have 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. How are the survivors? I loved your description of getting them all together on Zoom and seeing each other after 30, 40 years, because it seemed like many of them just wanted to move on with their lives, but now they're coming out of the shadows and connecting. How are they?
crazy. So these kids have parents that have failed them, and I have a few adopted daughters now that I have just grown to deeply love. For 30 years, I stayed completely away from the kids. The last thing they needed was me to remind them. About 4 years ago, I received an email that said, hey, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was in the cult and I'm having a lot of memories. Could you help me? And I thought about that for a couple of days. I sent her back a note and I said, I'm retired. I don't know that I could help you. I wish you the very best. Find some good counseling. And she accepted that very sadly. And within 2 days, 3 days, I received a second email from an entirely independent other cult victim who said, hey, I'm having some memories. I need some help. And I responded the same way to her. And then the next day, the Utah Victims' Rights Coalition called and said, hey, wondering if you'd do a 30-year recap on the cult and where the kids are. And I said, absolutely not. And I went down in the basement where I had my old Zion Society files, which we used to keep back in the old days, where we kept all our police reports and all the videos of the child transcripts and interviews. And I looked at that thing and I said, I'm getting rid of this. Well, anyway, and I've only got 55 seconds. I'm sorry, I'm rambling too much. We met with the kids and we brought them together on a Zoom call. It was like watching a whole batch of sailors. Some of them swore really loudly, others didn't. And they hadn't seen each other in 30 years, and they started to connect. And then since then, we learned that they had suffered because they didn't get education. They suffered because they didn't have a support system. They suffered because they didn't have counseling. So we went to the governor of the state of Utah, and we miraculously got them to agree to pay for counseling for these kids 30 years later.
Wow. Amazing. This is why he's my hero.
And I'm going to just add one more. And then we went to the Weber State University president and we said, here's a little story. What do you think? And he met with the girls and he said, whether you want a GED or a PhD will help you. And for those of you who attended my session yesterday, you saw a little bit about Raggedy Ann. Just go to Profiling Evil and look up Raggedy Ann and you'll watch just a little clip that changed a little girl who's now 40 years old's life. And then 3 weeks ago, we were invited to Los Angeles as Andrea walked and got her master's degree.
That's awesome. So great.
All right.
So I guess you can feel now why Mike's our new hero, and so proud to call you our friend. Where can people find you and tell us about what you're doing now, Profiling Evil? Just give a little...
I purchased a chainsaw and a fly rod with great intent of never talking about this again, but it's kind of changed our lives. Profiling Evil, at Profiling Evil, one word, will get you to YouTube or the Facebook webpage.
All that stuff.
But we went to our friends who produced the podcast series Cold, if any of you have watched that or listened to that. 80 million downloads, folks. And we sat down with the vice president of podcasting, who happens to be in the audience today, and said, what do you think? And the corporation came back with an offer that just didn't seem right. So we talked a little more, and they agreed to meet us halfway, and all of the proceeds from our portion of this podcast, which we will release in an email to everyone at CrimeCon. I think the CrimeCon staff is announcing it and releasing it in a day or two, will be a new podcast called Cult Files. It'll be several years long, we're hoping, but season 1 will be Gardens of Evil, about this story, with the proceeds going to build this new children's advocacy center that's 2 months underway right now. So. Wow.
This is one of the many silver linings of being in a cult. Thank you all.
Don't join one.
But don't.
For the
It's not. You could probably.
It's not what we're saying.
Not what I'm saying. Thank you all so much for being with us today and for being such a captive, wonderful audience. We'll be outside to do a little shake hands and say hi before we hit the road back to Atlanta. So thank you again. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, all that stuff. And anything else?
Oh, thank you guys.
This has been an incredible experience. Thank you, CrimeCon, for having us. Thank you. You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. Well, everybody, that was our episode from CrimeCon. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we also hope we get to do more such things, live shows and whatnot in the future.
I think live is our future. Just sitting next to Mike King and having an experience of him, being able to feel what this trial and this experience meant to him, actually seeing his eyes well up when he was talking about the victims. Live makes so much more personal, and it informs things in so many different ways that you can't over Riverside.
That's true.
So
it was great to hug him,
there.
too. He's such a big teddy bear. And we also wanted to thank CrimeCon for having us out. That was a wonderful experience. Great to meet so many of you in person and sign some books. Oh, speaking of which, should we tell them?
No, shouldn't tell them.
Top secret. We haven't even announced the title yet. But our next book, Spring 2025, is now available for pre-order at sarahedmondson.com/book and also on our Little Bit Culty website. So if you want to be some of the first to get an autographed, I wouldn't say hand-delivered, hand-mailed.
Hand-mailed, yeah. Air
copy
mail.
of our book. We will be talking about it more soon, but this is the book that we wish we had had when we got out of the cult 7 years ago. A compilation of the greatest hits from this podcast will be yours in spring of 25. So check that out and check out Mike's book and his podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources, and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.
Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.